Hi everyone, Joe Dolan here, fantasyguru.com, managing editor, and I'm here to break down the 2018 quarterback class, the incoming rookie quarterback class. It's one of the most interesting quarterback classes we've had in quite some time here in the NFL, and that's because I believe that there are going to be 5 quarterbacks going in the first round of this year's NFL draft. It's going to be Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, and Lamar Jackson in whatever order those guys go in. And I think it's going to be really intriguing because we got 5 different type of guys here. Let's start with Sam Darnold. I actually believe that Sam Darnold's going to be the number 1 overall pick with the Cleveland Browns. A lot of reports that John Dorsey, the GM of the Browns, really likes Darnold. Kind of a baller. Our guy Greg Cosell has described him, but he's got prototypical size for the position, great movement ability, the ability to improvise, and he's outrageously young. He's just 20. He doesn't turn 21, I believe, until June. And you got to keep in mind that DeShone Kizer last year was the youngest quarterback in the NFL, and he was 6 months older at the time he was drafted than Sam Darnold is going to be. So that just gives you a little bit of a description into how young Darnold's going to be. And it makes sense then if the Browns are going to draft him that they acquired Tyrod Taylor to at least open the season as the starting quarterback so they don't have a repeat of what happened with DeShone Kizer having to deal with so much right from the get-go and, in my opinion, poor coaching. And Sam Darnold, if you really like him, I think you can see some Carson Wentz in his ability. I'm not sure he's that athletically gifted. I think there are a lot of similarities in his game to that of Jameis Winston, and I'm talking both positive and negative. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to throw some interceptions, but once again, I think you can overrate avoiding interceptions. If somebody's an overly cautious thrower and they're not willing to pull the trigger when they need to. I think Darnold is willing to pull the trigger. I think there are going to be some growing pains, but there's the mobility, the arm strength, and I think the have to be a really successful NFL quarterback here in Sam Darnold. He's probably going to take some time to develop. He might be frustrating, but I think this guy's probably going to be the number 1 overall pick, and it's kind of hard for me to disagree with that. That takes us to Baker Mayfield, who I think a lot of people weren't expecting to like as much as they did, at least some quarterback traditionalists. He's under 6'1", but he's not like 5'9". He's more solidly built than a guy like Johnny Manziel. And the comparisons to Johnny Manziel as a thrower, I think, are a little bit ridiculous. He's a more accurate thrower. I think he's got a stronger arm than Johnny Manziel, and he made way more plays from structure. That doesn't mean Mayfield can't improvise. As a matter of fact, this is a guy who ran for well over 1,000 yards in college, 21 rushing touchdowns. And you got to remember, in college, sack yardage is taken out of rushing yardage. So he can make plays. He's a determined competitor. This is a guy who walked on at Texas Tech and then Oklahoma and won the starting quarterback job at both spots. And then at Oklahoma, he never threw fewer than 36 touchdowns in 3 seasons, and he never threw more than 8 interceptions. So unbelievably efficient for Baker Mayfield. There's no doubt his personality is going to rub some the wrong way. Let's just call it out. I think the crotch grab incident against Kansas last year probably overblown, but this is somebody who has been arrested for public intoxication, among other things. Teams have to weigh that, but there's no doubt Mayfield is a leader. He's a competitor, and I think a lot of teams, if they think outside the box at the quarterback position, they're going to be really intrigued by Mayfield. There's a little bit less to talk about with a guy like Josh Rosen out of UCLA. Really reminds me of Matt Ryan physically. Good arm, excellent mechanics. I think the traditional frame that you look for, even though he's probably a little bit on the thin side. A couple of downsides with Rosen. Number 1, concussions. He had 2 of them in his junior season, his final year at UCLA. That's got to be read into because he missed his bowl game because of that. And he had throwing shoulder surgery his sophomore season, kind of cost him half of his sophomore season. So you have this polished prospect, not a guy who runs around a whole lot. He is the most pure pocket passer in this class, but he also has the most extensive injury history of anybody in this class. So you really got to look at that from that perspective when it comes to Josh Rosen. Additionally, this is a guy who is not afraid to express his opinion. I have no issues with that whatsoever, but some NFL teams might. We just got to kind of look at it from that regard. I still expect him to be a top 5 pick, probably a top 3 pick. The New York Jets is the team I'm really honing in on. The quarterback traditionalists, this is probably going to be their guy in this class. Though once again, I think the injuries are kind of an issue with Josh Rosen that you have to look at. These are big time issues. But this is a guy who carried a really bad team around him, not good on the offensive line and really poor at the weapons position. So Josh Rosen was kind of doing it all himself at UCLA. The guy who I would rank number one from a fantasy standpoint, if he was starting in week one, would be Lamar Jackson. The problem is, I'm not sure the NFL teams like Lamar Jackson as much as I do. He's 6'2 and a quarter, 216 pounds. He looks a lot thinner than that, though. This looks like a guy who is going to absorb a lot of contact. And as we've seen, Cam Newton is a guy who's built like a left tackle, but he's absorbed a ton of contact in his career, and it feels like that's kind of catching up to him. So that's going to be a concern with Lamar Jackson. But otherwise, there's a ton to like with Lamar Jackson. Played in a pro-style offense at Louisville. Everybody just kind of takes these running quarterbacks and presumes they don't play in a pro-style offense. Lamar Jackson did. A lot of pro-style passing game concepts from Bobby Petrino, and Lamar Jackson executed those concepts very well and very efficiently. He seems to have a very good head for the passing game concepts in the offense. A large part of his rushing yards came off of designed runs. So this wasn't a guy who was out there running around and scrambling, even though he has that kind of ability. He is the best, most explosive athlete at the position since Michael Vick. Michael Vick has said it. The comparison is apt. Now, Lamar Jackson didn't didn't do the agility drills, the athletic drills at the combine. He had nothing to gain from that. The people who think he's got to be a wide receiver, those people were only going to be reinforced by his, what I would presume would be incredible athletic testing. That's not going to be the case for Lamar Jackson. He's going to be a quarterback prospect. He has great arm strength. I think he shows a willingness to throw into tight windows. There is a lot to work on for Lamar Jackson, though. His mechanics get wild. And although Baker Mayfield's aren't great, Baker Mayfield, when he throws on the run, he's really accurate. And Lamar Jackson, you would think for a guy who has the mobility of him, as he does, would be really good at throwing on the run. I think he gets a little bit erratic. He has a tendency to sail some throws that could lead to some interceptions. You might remember Carson Wentz. That was a problem for him coming out of North Dakota State. He fixed that in his second year. So these are things that can work on. Lower body mechanics are way easier to fix than upper body mechanics for NFL quarterback coaches. And I think the right coach and the right system for Lamar Jackson, maybe a team like Jacksonville trades up into the top 20 to draft him. I think that would be a phenomenal fit for a guy like Lamar Jackson, a run-first offense with some talent on the perimeter and the ability to go down the field. If you could guarantee me Lamar Jackson would be a week one starter, I'd rank him number one for fantasy as a rookie without qualms, but I just feel like he's going to go fifth of these five top quarterbacks that I'm talking about, and that's a big problem for me. And that brings us to Josh Allen. I think everything's been said about Josh Allen that can be said. 56.2% completion percentage in college. A lot of physical ability, a ton of physical ability, and a lot of erraticisms. Greg Cosell, our guy Greg Cosell, has described him as a wild stallion. If you draft Josh Allen, you have got to believe in your process. You have got to believe in your coaching. And even still, he feels like a high-risk prospect. But in terms of size, movement ability, athletic ability, he might be the best quarterback to enter the league since Cam Newton, even a better athlete than Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz was a far more polished passer coming out of North Dakota State. I think people have revisionist history with regards to Carson Wentz. I think he was a way better, way more polished passer than people give him credit for. Not really Allen's game, though I heard he interviewed well with teams, showed up well on the blackboard. That's just going to reinforce the teams that like him. I think he's probably going to go as the fourth quarterback of these four. Some people have argued that he could be in the play for number one overall with the Browns. I still think it's going to be Darnold. I think Allen needs to sit. 28 touchdowns, 15 interceptions as a sophomore, regressed to 16 touchdowns as a junior when he lost all of his weapons. His yards per attempt absolutely plummeted. As a junior from 8.6 to 6.7. 6.7 is really low for a perceived top quarterback prospect, but he did lose a lot of weapons. And I actually think he cleaned up his decision making as a junior. The problem is the erratic nature of his game is still there, but he's got an incredible arm, good movement ability. Let's be honest. It's easy to see why scouts like this guy, even though I think he is the widest range of outcomes of any quarterback in this class and probably has the highest bust potential as well. It's a really deep class at the top, but after you get to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, there's really not a whole lot going on. Mason Rudolph from Oklahoma State's probably going to be the next guy off the board, maybe in that second, third round. Very prolific passer in college. Very good deep passer, accurate deep passer. Problem is, I think his arm sometimes looks like a wet noodle. His mechanics can become a mess, and when your arm strength isn't there, and you got lower body mechanics that are out of whack under pressure, that is a recipe for interceptions. I think if you really like Mason Rudolph, you might project maybe down the line a Kirk Cousins style career for him. I think he's more likely to be an A.J. McCarron, maybe a guy who's thought of as a high-end backup who might get a chance to start down the line, kind of like McCarron might get in Buffalo this year. Maybe a Mike Glennon type of player, though his arm isn't as strong as that. I'm not really into Mason Rudolph. That Oklahoma State offense, wide open. I'm not really sure how he's going to translate to the NFL. Then you got guys like Luke Falk, Kyle Lauletta out of Richmond, Mike White from Western Kentucky. All these guys were good college players, but I just think there are some real major fatal flaws that are going to prevent these guys from becoming NFL starting quarterbacks. So it's a really interesting, very deep class. I think guys like Darnold, Mayfield, Jackson, and Allen, if he reaches his ceiling, could be great two-way threats for fantasy football. Josh Rosen, if he ends up in the right situation, could end up becoming a Matt Ryan type of passer down the line. This is really a personal preference type of class. There are 5 very different quarterbacks. I'm interested to see where they land. I'm interested to see who plays and who plays early and who has to wait a little bit longer, maybe like a Patrick Mahomes did last year. So I'm excited to see where these guys go. If you guys have any questions, make sure you follow me on Twitter at FG_Dolan and check out my pre-draft rookie report on the quarterbacks, which is up for free at fantasyguru.com. You can get my full detailed breakdowns on this entire class.